Hello everyone, Amod here from the Target Common YouTube channel. In this video tutorial of Playwright YouTube playlist, we will learn in-depth usage of getByRole Locator of Playwright. In the previous video, I have covered basics of getByRole Locator like what is called user-facing attributes, area role, area attributes, and accessible name. I also covered to find role and name of any web element to use with getByRole Locator. Now let's continue. If we click on this link and go to new tab, and if you come down, it gives number of arguments it accepts. So first argument is role, which is mandatory, and second argument is options object, which is optional. Under this object, we have multiple attributes like checked, disabled, exact, etc. And we are going to see all these attributes with examples in this video. So let's start with checked attribute, which will accept a boolean value. It says an attribute that is usually set by area-checked or native input type checkbox. So basically, we can check a checkbox or check a radio button. And we can create checkboxes or radio buttons in multiple ways. We can use native way where we can use input tag with type as checkbox or radio to create a checkbox and radio button respectively. Or we can use some custom ways to create that. Let me show you example. So here I have two checkboxes and one radio button. If you inspect first checkbox, then you can see I'm using input tag with the type checkbox. If you inspect this radio button, I'm using input tag with type radio. So these are native ways to create a checkbox or radio button. But if you go to second checkbox and if you inspect it, you can see I'm using div tag and I'm using scripts to make this div as a checkbox. So in the native ways, you can see this subscribe to newsletter checkbox is checked. Then we have one attribute here checked. Same thing for radio button, but if you inspect this checkbox again, here you can see I'm using area-checked attribute to give the information about whether element is checked or not. If I check this checkbox, then you can see area-checked attribute value is changed to true. So why I am explaining all these things? Because this checked attribute will work only with your native ways or with any custom checkboxes or radio buttons where we have area-checked attribute. If you don't use, then getByRole Locator will not work. Now let's use this getByRole Locator with checked attribute. So suppose here I need to find checkbox which is checked. So let me quickly find role of this checkbox. So here you can see the role is checkbox and name is subscribe to newsletter. But I don't know which checkbox will be checked. So I want to find checkbox which is checked and then get this name attribute. So I have basic script ready where I am loading this getByRole underscore checked HTML web page. Then I'm going to write await then page.getByRole role is checkbox and second argument will be an object type. So let's pass an object and within this object I'm going to pass check colon true. Then I'm going to call get attribute method and I want to find the value of name attribute which should return me subscribe, and this I'm going to store into a variable. Maybe I can name it as checked value and I will simply log it. Let me open UI mode. So npx write test dash dash UI. So under getByRole spec I have this test. Let me click on this button. So you can see execution is over and test is passed. If you go to console tab, here you can see it is printing subscribe, which is value of name attribute. Suppose I want to get the name attribute for the checkbox which is not checked, which is agreed to terms and condition here. If you inspect it, here we don't have checked attribute and name is terms. So let's go to VS Code and instead of true, let's put false. If you run this now, it should return me terms. But instead of that, it is giving me error because for this locator, I'm getting two web elements and it is confused what to return. First one input name terms type checkbox and this is the custom checkbox. Now let's go to next attribute which is disabled. And if you read the description here, it says an attribute that is usually set by area-disabled or disabled attributes. So most of the parts are similar to checked Example, if you inspect first checkbox, here you can see I'm using input tag with type checkbox, and here I have native attribute called disabled. Similarly, if you inspect this submit button, here also I'm using native attribute called disabled. But for the third one, so here I'm using area hyphen disabled to give the information whether element is enable or disabled. If I click on this disable checkbox button, you can see area hyphen disabled attribute value has been changed to true. So my getByRole locator will use either the native attribute value or area hyphen disabled. Similar concept whatever we saw in check attribute. So I'm going to get the button which is disabled, then get the text using getByRole locator. Let's see how can we do that. So here I can use await page.getByRole. Rule will be button, then use object, and within this I need to use disabled and value will be true. Once you find the element, then get me inner text, which is a function, and value I'm going to store into a variable, maybe disabled text, and let me log it. So console.log, pass the variable name. Let me go to UI mode, reload, and run the getByRole disable test. So test is passed, and if you go to console, it is printing submit, which is expected. Let's move to another attribute, which is exact. When you pass accessible name with getByRole locator, so it always checks contains, not the exact match. If you want exact match, then you need to pass this attribute. And when you pass name as a regular expression, then this attribute will be ignored. Let's try this. If you inspect this disable checkbox, here you can see role is button and we have name as disable checkbox. So let me use getByRole locator on this web element. Let me copy this name in the VS Code. I'm going to write await page.getByRole. Role is button. Then I'm going to pass an object where first attribute I will pass name, which is exact name I am passing. But before we pass the exact name, I'm going to remove this checkbox and let me get the count, which I will store into variable, and let me log this value, save it, and go to UI mode and run the second test. So here you can see it is giving 1. On this HTML web page, we have only one button where we have disable text. So you can see it is not matching exactly. It is checking contains. So we have one button where name contains disable. That's why it's working. But if I put comma exact and pass the value as true and save it, go to UI mode, rerun it. This time it is giving 0 web element. So the next argument is expanded, and this is tied to area hyphen expanded. So for expanded also I have created one simple HTML, and if you inspect it, for this toggle section button I am using area hyphen expanded as false. When I click on this, you can see it shows some content and area is expanded. That's why value has been changed to true. So if you want to use expanded attribute with getByRole locator, we can use expanded attribute like any other attribute. So let's go to VS Code, and I have already created one test to load this expanded HTML file, and here I can use await page.getByRole. Role is button, and in the options I will pass expanded should be false, and if it is found, then get me inner text, which I will store into a variable and log into console. So I'm expecting this should return me this toggle section, which is inner text of my button. So let's go to UI mode and click on run button. So you can see in the console, I can see toggle section inner text for my non-expanded button. Now let's go to another attribute called include hidden. So it says this option can be used to match with hidden elements. By default, it gives you only non-hidden elements. And in this case also, it might use some native ways, or it will look for area hyphen hidden attribute. For this also, I have created one HTML. Let me inspect this page. So in this form, I have two radio buttons, and if you click yes, you can see send button, or if you click no, then it will be schedule button. And here I am using style attribute to hide button. Initially, both buttons are hidden. Now let's use include hidden attribute with getByRole Locator. So I have test ready where I am loading my hidden element HTML page, and here I'm going to use page dot getByRole. My role will be button, then pass include hidden as true, and let me get the count, which I will store into a variable, and let me log. Let me change title. Now go to UI mode and run the fourth test. So here it is giving 2 because initially both buttons are hidden. If you make include hidden as false or you remove this attribute, then it is going to return you 0. Another attribute is label, which is taking a number value, and this can be used with heading, list items, row or tree items. Let me show an example quickly. So I have one HTML page, getByRole underscore label HTML, open in a browser, and here I have multiple titles. Let me inspect this page. We have from H1 to H6, and based on numbers, the font size of heading will be changed. Like H1 is bigger, but H2 will be little smaller, and so on. So for the headers, we do need to mention any area hyphen label attribute, but for others like list items or tree items, we need to mention it. If you see here, I have a list here. Under UL we have li, then again we have ul and li, that means nested list items. So explicitly I need to mention area hyphen label here so that I can use with my getByRole Locator. If you don't, then you cannot use it. Similarly, I have one table. If you go to T body, here also I am using area label. Suppose I want to get the count of all H2 headers. So basically here I have two H2 headers. So I can use label attribute with this. Let me show you how. So in this test, I am going to use role as heading, and I will pass option as label, and I will pass 2. Let's go to UI mode, and if you run this test, it will going to return you 2 because we have total 2 H2 headers. If you don't mention this label, it is going to return me all the headers count. So let me remove this, save it, and rerun. So you can see count is 5. Name we have already covered in the previous video also and in this video also. So for the name attribute, we need to pass accessible name. By default, it is case insensitive and searches for a substring. If you want exact match, then you need to pass exact option. And for the remaining two, pressed and selected, I am going to show you HTML file, and concepts are very much similar. I will suggest you to experiment that. So for this pressed attribute, it is looking for this area hyphen pressed area attribute, and for this selected, we have this area hyphen selected attribute. I have created one HTML file for both. You can practice. So here I have multiple tabs, and when you click on this, the color of tab will be changed, which will represent that this tab is selected. If you inspect this tab, here I am using area selected attribute, which is true for my second tab. For first and third, it is false. And for the rest attribute, I have this HTML file. Let me open in browser, and here if you inspect it, you can see initially area hyphen pressed is false, and when I toggle it, it is changed to true. If you have any doubt, please comment on this video. If you really like my videos, please like, comment, subscribe and share with others. Thank you everyone.